Good morning, Dog Nation. This is Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And may I say, what a good morning it is. How refreshing is it to wake up this week knowing that the rivalry that has plagued Georgia for such a long time is now in the rearview mirror. A new era has dawned for the program, and 42-7 against Florida may have been all the difference. We're talking about it all. Chip Towers on the way as well as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Well, I have to say that Saturday was about as satisfying as it could be. I know many of you agree with that as well. And one of the things that was fun about DawgNation Daily over the last week or so is I gave so many of you a chance to kind of tell your own story. Obviously, for the last year here on our program, I talked about what the Georgia-Florida rivalry meant to me and how much I was looking forward to seeing this rivalry change here under Kirby Smart, and believe that 2017 was really a year in which that could happen, not just because Georgia's on the rise. We felt like there was some reasons to think that Florida may be on its way to faltering, and on Saturday, all of that comes true right there in front of our very eyes for us all to see. And I know from having spoken to so many of you in Jacksonville and having talked to so many of you on social media that this was, not just for me, but for all of you, a really, really wonderful weekend. Obviously, if you're watching me on video right now, I've got my red Gatorade t-shirt on. I love seeing a lot of those in Jacksonville over the weekend, both the red and the black version. And I love the idea of Georgia as a program kind of moving forward with sort of a new era of the program now that this rivalry has kind of been corrected. The record, so to speak, has been corrected, and Georgia's ready to move on in a big direction. We're obviously going to have a lot of fun, not just today with this on the show, but this week here as well. And, of course, we'll quickly look ahead to the upcoming game against South Carolina before the week's done as well. But we're going to let this one sort of marinate for a moment. We're going to enjoy this one a little bit here on DawgNation Daily. And one of the things in particular that I really enjoyed about the postgame from Saturday is something that Kirby Smart had to say in his postgame press conference. Now, y'all know that Kirby Smart does not play ball with a lot of things pregame the way that maybe I sort of wish he would. You know, I've been very clear, very adamant that Georgia's biggest rival is supposed to be Florida. This is the game that's supposed to matter more. Winning this thing in the future is going to bring great success to Georgia. It's the loss in the past that I think hurts the most for Georgia, especially given the fact that Georgia, a good program overall, has struggled so much in Jacksonville. You know, a lot of times pregame, Kirby Smart pretends that he doesn't even know any of that stuff, doesn't remember any of that kind of stuff. But after the game, he did acknowledge something that's obviously true, that for Georgia, this win on Saturday night, for the fans in particular, is not about just keeping pace towards an SEC championship. It's not about just, staying undefeated and moving on to something that might one day result in the college football playoff. No, it was about, I love the word he uses, and you're going to hear him use it, a starving fan base who had wanted this one for a long time. Listen to Kirby talk about the fans and the seniors and the entire organization that went to Jacksonville, got a big win over Florida.
I think it's special for all the seniors. It's special for our entire university. It's special for our fan base who is starving for some success in Florida. The past does not affect the present. And that the most important thing for our team is to keep chopping wood, keep moving ahead, and as long as the seniors buy into that, they'll keep leading us in the right direction.
Totally agree with him on every point there. The seniors obviously got to turn their attention quickly on to South Carolina, the next thing. Dog fans. But here on DawgNation Daily, we can pause for a moment. Here on DawgNation Daily, we can reflect on this stuff a moment. I don't want to be too corny here, but it's nice to know that Kirby knew how much this meant to so many of you. Not, Mr. Football all the time and totally unplugged from the feelings and the emotions of his fan base, that while he may want his team kind of robotic and next man up, next game up, keep chopping wood, he himself was at least plugged in enough to know that to a lot of folks, going down to Jacksonville and finding a way to win some games like it won on Saturday was something that was really important to a lot of people, and I love hearing that from Kirby Smart after the game. I also like what Kirby Smart said to his seniors and what his message was to them. And, Georgia and the fan base and the organization owed such a tremendous debt of gratitude to guys like Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Davin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter and Dominic Sanders and Aaron Davis and on you could go. The guys who wanted to come back because of unfinished business and wanted to lay a foundation for success this program may enjoy for the next decade. The names I just mentioned were the group that sort of laid the bedrock to make that possible. And Kirby Smart gave us a little bit of an indication about what his message was to them about how to end this rivalry in style.
the best they could do, I told them, you can't make up for 3 years' time. And people are going to remember you by your record. But the best thing you can do is be 1-0 against Florida your senior year. And they committed to that, and they challenged the younger players to practice the right way and focus on it, and tried to make it about how we play and getting better and not about all the other distractions involved with the game.
I mean, listen, it is entirely possible, not a guarantee, of course, but it is entirely possible that one day in the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, however long Kirby Smart's here, maybe it's 15 years from now. We don't know what the future holds, but we can sort of make some educated guesses here for a moment. There is a chance that many years in the future, you're going to have young people, like my son, who's growing up to be a Georgia fan, but he's only 5 years old right now. By the time he gets to be a little older and he's, living and dying with these games the way that I was when I was a kid, he may not realize there was a period of time in which Florida dominated this rivalry. He may not realize there was a period of time when a fan base was starved for this victory, because maybe by the time that the young Georgia fans are a little older, all they will have known is the sort of Georgia victory winning this series with regularity. That may be what the future holds. Not a guarantee that it will play out that, but it could play out that way. And if it does, as we said, those seniors who were disappointed with their last 3 trips to Jacksonville did have the opportunity to go 1-0 in their senior season. But it may not be just one win they contribute to. It could be a 2018 win they contribute to. It could be 2019, 2020 because of the mindset they allowed to establish for Kirby Smart in his second season. That one day, before the game when they kind of bring down those new Georgia-Florida Hall of Famers, a lot of the guys who played in this game, my guess is Sony Michel for sure, maybe others, will be invited to be a part of that and be an honorary captain. They can tell the story about what they did way back in 2017. And it's really cool to think that these Georgia seniors are carving out for themselves such a special place in this program's history. And here on this program, we're obviously glad that includes a 42-7 win over the Florida Gators. I also like something else that Kirby said on Saturday, and I think it sets us up for what we want to talk about some more here. This notion that even though the past had been bad to Georgia, that was the kind of thing that, as a coach, that Kirby Smart couldn't think about too much. That Kirby Smart had to focus in on only what could be controlled in this game right now. And the only thing that impacts the present, according to Kirby Smart, are the things that are happening right now. Nothing to do with any of the previous games. Here's a little more from the coach.
The present affects the present. Past doesn't affect the present. Anything that's happened here before, what does that have to do with this team? It has nothing to do with this team. And they talked a long time this off week about owning their burden, the burden of being a highly ranked team, to being the favorite. I mean, own the burden with your work and let it pay off on Saturdays. And they've done that.
They've done that not just in the game against Florida, but every other game so far this season, and reason to believe many more games to come before the year is done. And let me be very realistic for a moment, because here's what you, the listener of this program or the viewer of this program, depending on whether or not you connect with us through video or audio means, here's what you're going to hear from some of your non-Georgia fan friends. Some of your friends root for Florida or root for Tennessee or root for some other school. They're going to tell you, okay, yeah, so Georgia won 42-7, but that's just because Florida's not very good and Florida's about to fire its coach. And yeah, Georgia may own the East here in 2017, but have you seen how bad the East is? That's because of the reason why Georgia looks so good, both on Saturday and this season, is because of how bad the SEC East looks. But here's the one thing that I believe that and deep down, even the friends of yours who are Georgia haters, they probably also know as well. College football is a little bit of a zero-sum game. And what I mean by that is one team's rise means another team's fall. You know why Florida's so bad right now? You know why Jim McElwain, maybe in a panic, exaggerated some death threats that led his employer to lose faith and trust in him and lead to his ouster after the game on Saturday against Georgia? You know why all that happens? At least in some measure, it's about the rise of Georgia. Because the reason why not every team can be good at the same time is because there is a limited resource that's out there, and that's players. Listen, there are a million coaches. I mean, there are coaches everywhere, and there's always sort of the next hot coach, the next hot assistant to get a raise and get a promotion and get a big job. Some of them work out, some of them don't. There is no shortage of coaches out there in college football, but there's a tremendous shortage of players. They can't all be equally distributed in the SEC at the same time. Every now and then, a really talented group just sort of congregates at the same school for a period of time. That's happening in the SEC West right now at Alabama. That's been going on. That's why Alabama has dominated that division. Also happening right now at Georgia. I mean, look at the Florida roster up and down that day. And yes, I know they've had some injuries and suspensions. But who did you see for Florida that could play for Georgia? Who did you see for Florida that even in a private conversation among your friends, you'd say, boy, I might trade that guy for Georgia's guy at the very same position? There are not as many of those as there used to be, and there may not just be very many at all. So one of the reasons why you see Jim McElwain out the door at Florida desperately searching for a new coach, is because of the panic created by the rise of Georgia. I think to a certain extent the same thing's true at Tennessee as well. So yes, the SEC East, which has been down for a few years, may still be down here in 2017. But this season, it's down for a very different reason. It's because Georgia's hoarding all the talent, hoarding all the wins, and hoarding all the opportunity. Gator haters got a good day on Saturday. Georgia got a win on against Florida. My guess is there are going to be many more in the years to come as well. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's great to have you with us here on what's obviously a special day for our program. And, of course, we're glad to have you connect with us no matter how you do so. At 10 a.m. each and every Monday through Friday on the Facebook page, we broadcast the show live on Facebook Live. Thanks so much for those of you who watch us on video every day, on the radio at noon every day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We appreciate you being with us. And in podcast form on SoundCloud, iTunes, we post DawgNation.com. However you access our show in podcast form, thanks for finding us. We try to make it as easy for you as we can. And by the way, I know, some of you are very upset about what happened on Friday with the podcast. Trust me, no one's more upset about it than I am and the folks who work with us each and every day here on the show. We had a terrible technical issue with the podcast. Now, video went off the way it always does. Radio, just fine on Friday. But for the people who choose to listen to the show via podcast, they were not able to hear Friday's shows. Here's what we're going to do. Before we post today's show, this Monday show of DawgNation Daily, we are also going to put Friday's podcast up on SoundCloud. Now, you may say, well, why would I go back and listen to an old show from Friday? Maybe you don't have time to do that, and if you don't, I understand. But if you can make time to go back and listen to Friday's podcast, we did have some really cool, great clips from Georgia, Florida past, courtesy of our friends at the UGA Vault. We kind of teamed up to kind of go back into the annals of Georgia history and had some fun with that. We also had Jeff Sintel talking about the James Cook commitment, and we had some fun as well with our Kroger commercial as well, the video that many of you may not have had a chance to see yet. It was actually a really fun show on Friday. I even drank a cocktail on the air if you want to know just how crazy things kind of got this past Friday. So we'll post that episode number 565, I believe, of DawgNation Daily. We'll have that for you up on SoundCloud today, and it should also land there for you on iTunes as well. Let me really quickly say thank you to those who were part of our DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville, including Dixie Vodka, who was on there with us there that day. By the way, we went through 28 bottles of Dixie Vodka at our DawgNation Invasion tailgate on Saturday. We had a great time giving away our Gator Hater t-shirts, courtesy of all our sponsors, including Dixie Vodka, Kroger, Marlowe's, and R.S. Andrews. It was a terrific, terrific event. Thank you all so much for being a part of it. It was really fun hanging out with the folks from Dixie Vodka, the South's best-tasting vodka, really all weekend long. That was a blast. We've got Chip Towers coming up on today's show. Let me let you hear a little bit more from Kirby Smart before we get to Chip. And one of the storylines, obviously, last week, we spent a lot of time here on DawgNation Daily, was the trash talk of the Florida players, what Chauncey Gardner had to say, what Hammond, the receiver, Josh Hammond, the receiver, had to say, about Georgia's inability to beat Florida, what Chauncey Gardner thought about Jake Fromm and his slant passes. Kind of interesting that Gardner got rocked on a slant pass. Well, Kirby Smart was asked about that trash talk from Florida, and as you might imagine, Kirby Smart kind of played that coy and said, listen, when it comes to sending that message back to my team, that message is not delivered by me. Here's more of Kirby.
Now, leadership group handles that. I mean, I've gotten to the point I don't really have to anymore. They understand. They know that we do our talking with our helmets. I mean, we want to have class. We want to have integrity.
So that's Kirby Smart on that, saying they don't have to do that. They don't have to. He doesn't have to be the one that does that. That Georgia does its talking with its helmets. You love to hear that from Kirby Smart, and it's a part of that that real message that I think that Georgia has been sending all season long. That this is a team that's going to be led not just by coaches but by leaders on the field. This is a team that's going to have a good dose of that leadership, and obviously we saw a lot of that on the field for Georgia on Saturday. One more quick clip I want to play for you before we get to Chip Towers. And that is to go back to the coaches here for a moment, to go back to Kirby Smart and his impact on this game. And, keeping those emotions in check when you've got a rival on the other side of the field, when you've got a team that may have been talking trash. Well, Kirby Smart, because he's been here, I think has an indication of kind of exactly how he wants to handle that.
We talk about, being the more physical team, being toughness, but we don't want to lose our emotions because in this game, as I remember and recall it, a lot of players make bad decisions and make dumb penalties. So we talk about having controlled aggression.
Yeah, so, and obviously they were able to do that. And by the way, if you're a Georgia fan, how nice is it to have a coach like Kirby Smart? We've debated before. How much does being an alumnus of Georgia help Kirby Smart as Georgia coach? Maybe in some respects it doesn't help much at all, but having the institutional knowledge of what it feels like to be a player, both on the winning side and the losing side of a game against the Florida Gators, and that I do think helps Kirby. He can speak from sort of a first-person perspective of, hey, you want to go out there and try hard. Be careful you don't try too hard. You know, former Georgia quarterback David Green has talked about that on DawgNation Daily before, and Kirby Smart, because of his past, because of his backstory having been a Georgia player, maybe the kind of player that and coach now that can kind of deliver that message perfectly. So it's a great day here on DawgNation Daily, a really exciting time for the program, and there's a whole lot more to come, obviously starting with South Carolina this week. So we're going to have some fun with that here on the show, including Chip Towers right now. So it's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And I'll say hello to Chip Towers here, who was in Jacksonville on Saturday covering everything from the Georgia-Florida game, the 42-7 Georgia victory. And, you know, Chip, I know you've seen a lot of these, and I know you understand the historical significance of the game for Georgia. And it was really nice to hear Kirby Smart also kind of reference the starving fan base. If you're a Georgia fan, I think it's nice to know that your coach understands just how much this meant to so many Georgia fans, and the way he closed out his press conference with acknowledging that. I do think, Chip, there were probably a lot of Georgia fans who were glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a little bit revealing, Brandon, and I shared you know, your kind of appreciation for Kirby doing that, because he does spend so much time, you know, certainly sort of quoting the process and saying it's just the next game and what doesn't matter. But if you've been around Georgia football for any number of years, you know that 21 out of 27 that Georgia came in losing in this game hurts, and it's not really the fans and the coaches as much as because they come and go and they change, but it's all those dog people, as Larry Munson used to call them, you know, that come down there and invest all the money in the condos. I mean, it's the Georgia fans that carry the weight in this series. You could see that going down to Jacksonville and coming back, you know, from all those islands, all the Georgia fans flapping, and they're going to show up regardless. That game's not going anywhere, but to give them a little something to crow about was nice, and it was good for Kirby to acknowledge that.
And, you know, you certainly understand this because of your time covering the team. You know, this has not been for the last 30 years just a story about Florida winning versus Georgia. That'd be one thing if that was the case. No one hates admitting this more than me, but the truth is, really the story of this rivalry has been a lot of the blowouts, whether it be the Spurrier teams from the mid-'90s who were really hanging big scores on Georgia, or really even, you know, some of the last few games, like the 2014 game. Even though Georgia was a better team, that game wasn't close. I mean, Florida has not only won, but they've won decidedly against Georgia. So from that standpoint, for Georgia to kind of go out and get its own blowout win, I also felt like there was a little bit of significance there, that it was a symbolic gesture that really indicates maybe just how much this thing is about to change in the years ahead. The fact that Georgia is getting not just a win, but a comfortable win. Would you agree with me on that front?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not only, you know, the scene that you had there at the end of the game where it's, you know, pretty much empty on the Florida side and just packed and raucous on the Georgia side is very similar to a lot of games we've seen. The difference being that, you know, with Florida for a while there in the Spurrier years, it came to be something they absolutely expected. So, you know, kind of both teams were leaving toward the end of the game and going back home and back to their condos and back to the tailgates in the parking lot. That contrast was stark for Georgia on Saturday. And, you know, really it has been for every game, Brandon. You've been to every game like I have. Sure. That's been the scene in every single game, including the Notre Dame game. The only game so far that's been in, you know, undecided in the last few minutes. Even that scene, though, at the end of the Notre Dame game was just all Georgia in the stands, you know, celebrating and partying, and the other side kind of, you know, certainly lesser so.
Yeah, it is really kind of an amazing visual that the fan base has been able to produce at each and every one of the ends of these games. Something else that's been kind of a common theme this season is the way that Georgia strategically approaches the beginnings of games. And Kirby Smart has talked about wanting to see if the other team will quit. He means that metaphorically, but wanting to go out there and try to be physical, run the football, and see if that can be established early. And if it doesn't, Georgia's going to keep trying it until the third and fourth quarter. But on Saturday, it clearly worked against Florida. Georgia's able to get off to a fast start. And I would imagine that, for a team in Florida that has no shortage of confidence, Georgia getting off to the fast start enabled Georgia to sort of establish its confidence early, and any belief that Florida may have been able to try to establish in itself was obviously pretty quickly squashed by the fact that Georgia just came out from the jump and was pushing around physically.
Well, you've kind of seen that in all their games again. Kirby certainly wears it on his sleeve in terms of wanting to be more physical, wanting to be tougher than the opponent, and part of that is getting them to submit. That's really way Georgia did it in the 80s, and really in the 70s and the 80s under Vince Dooley and Irk Russell. They were just going to be tougher, physically more demanding. They're certainly doing that during the week, and I think you've seen that to some extent, a little bit of submission on the opponent's part. Just look at the third quarter. That's just the most incredible stat that we've uncovered in this whole thing. Is just, Georgia's giving up 3 points in the third quarter.
Yeah.
And that says a lot of things. Number one, it says a lot to the halftime adjustments that Mel Tucker and Jim Chaney and Kirby Smart are making, but also that that kind of football weighs on you. It hurts, and it hurts more for the punishee than it does the punisher. And certainly Georgia's been very fortunate all year with the injury bug, and especially getting this deep in the season, as physically as they're playing, not just in games, but in practice as well. That's something they're wearing as a badge of honor. But right now, it's they've been able to hold up to it, and Georgia opponents haven't been. And 32 points a game in SEC play, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's really something. And just to follow up on that point for a moment, in this series in particular for the last few games, now if you want to go back to the Urban Meyer era, the Steve Spurrier era, that wasn't so much about physicality. In a lot of cases, that was unfortunately just about better Florida teams, at least from the Georgia fans' perspective. Unfortunately, just too much talent on the Florida sideline. But in recent years, it's amazing the role that physicality has played for Florida in these wins. I referenced the 2014 game earlier. I mean, Chip, you remember that game plan for Florida that day. It was as dull and boring as it could be. They just ran the ball over and over again. Last year, Florida completely stopped any chance that Georgia would have to run the ball. The 3-game winning streak that Florida had been on coming into this season, so much of that had been dictated by physicality, which is another thing that sort of adds to the symbolism of Georgia's win by really doing it the way that Florida had done the 3 previous.
Well, that was the irony in the way this series had flipped. Certainly when Steve Spurrier was getting it done, that was the fun and gun, and people, Georgia fans in particular, would get mad when he's still throwing bombs with 5 minutes left in the game and a 3 or 4 touchdown lead. The last couple of years, it was ridiculous. I cited the stat on your show, I think I did, or on one of the other forums here, that it was 776 yards to 231 rushing. Florida in favor coming into this game. Certainly that changed significantly on Saturday and had a lot to do with Georgia being able to win the game.
I thought it was really interesting what Davin Bellamy had to say after the game. Roquan Smith a little bit. I guess Bellamy probably a little bit more outspoken than Roquan was, but they both let it be known that what Chauncey Gardner and Hammond this week had said, that did not sit well with some of these Georgia players. And it's sort of reminiscent of the Jonathan Abram talk going in the Mississippi State game. This is a defense that doesn't need extra motivation, but when they can find something to kind of put a chip on their shoulder, when they can use something to kind of keep younger players motivated, they're going to use it. And it's pretty clear that at least some of these veteran players for Georgia used some of that on Saturday. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, that's what teams like this do. I mean, you're looking for motivation anywhere you can get it. There's plenty of motivation just in the season as it is, but Georgia's not doing any of the talking right now, and the other teams are, and they just pounced all over that. That's just part and parcel, in my opinion, of the mismanagement by Jim McElwain and this whole thing, I was asking Pat Dooley of the Gainesville Sun early in the week. I said, "Yeah, what's the deal with them chirping off down there? I mean, I'm surprised as a 2-touchdown underdog that they're going to bother to say anything." And I just didn't think he had a handle on that quite as well as he should. And sure enough, Chauncey Gardner ends up getting trucked on a play, whether it was a pure slant, or whatever you want to call it. But it was, I started to say ironic, but I don't think that's appropriate. I think it was appropriate, really, that play ended like it did. And Georgia certainly answered that across the board on Saturday.
You're too much of a gentleman to say this, Chip, but what a lot of our listeners and viewers would say is it was fitting.
Yeah, fitting, very fitting. And, and I actually worried a minute that kid was really hurt because he stayed down, and that's at the end of the day, that's somebody's kid.
Sure.
And you just hope, not a back or a neck or something like it. It was that type of hit. But, man, we've seen it a lot the last few weeks, whether it be Sony Michel, DeAndre Swift. That not only is Georgia playing physical on defense, but they're playing physical on offense in the game and in the passing game as well, as it turns out.
All right, let's gossip, if you don't mind. You referenced this on Saturday in the press box, that it was one of the stranger scenes that you had seen. I know you wrote about this a little bit, but you and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit on Saturday. You have these venerable members of the media, you and Pat Dooley from the Gainesville Sun, other national writers who really spent the entire game on their cell phone trying to figure out what was going to happen to Jim McElwain at the end of the game. You're a guy that's as plugged in as anybody, also seeing these other people plugged in like yourself. What was it like kind of watching the end unfold for McElwain right there in front of your very eyes?
Well, it was one of those things that, early in the week you couldn't believe it. I sent my opposing view questions, which were directed to Pat Dooley this particular week, early in the week, and I would have phrased it differently when I said there's a little discontent with Jim McElwain despite winning back-to-back SEC East championships, and by the end of the week, that, little discontent had developed into a full-blown, contract buyout negotiation. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. But now if you look at it closely, it's like, okay, I can kind of see that because it's just, so McElwain's popped off a couple of times. I mean, it wasn't just this time. I found out during the press box myself that, he made some remarks at the end of the day. They closed with a nice recruiting class. Justin Thale can probably tell you about last February, and he said something then about how awful, Florida fans had been, and he was kind of like sticking it to them, saying, well, how about that, Gator fans, and then there was the stuff that he said this week, the death threats, which apparently could not be substantiated. Lest we forget, there were 9 players suspended due to a credit card fraud scheme, and, I know he can't control that, but you do have to know what your players are doing and what they're up to, and what that's what support staff and all these other checks and balances they put in. There was just a lot of things going wrong, and then you have what was happening this year. They were just, certainly the suspensions contributed to it, but just non-competitive, really, for the most part. That was a train wreck. And then the other things going on in the SEC and kind of in college football in general, there's so much money at stake, and when a domino starts to fall like this, certainly something's probably going to happen with Jones. Something's probably going to happen with Brett Bielema. You never know about Texas A&M. Well, then it becomes kind of a race. When you get toward the end of the year, it's kind of like, well, who's going to get who in the coaching carousel? So all of that came into play, but it happened way faster. And I wasn't sure during the game. By the end of the game, I had no doubt. By the time we're writing the story, I guess that's going to happen tonight or tomorrow or Monday at the latest is kind of what we came away from that thinking. And,
Chip, I think we're in a weird time here where, pretty clearly Jim McElwain just wasn't handling the pressure of the SEC. And being at a university where 2 coaches within sort of the modern era had won national championship. It's one thing if you've got sort of one coach who was sort of, the entire history of the program summed up by one name. But Spurrier had a championship. Meyer had a championship. The SEC is a league where every coach is paid more than $4 million. I think it's pretty obvious that McElwain was going to have a hard time with the pressure of that situation. That's one of the reasons why I think that, if did exaggerate or make up these death threats. I think that's one of the things, the pressure that may have led him to do that, because of the fact that it's very hard to satisfy Florida fans who want to kind of keep pace with the big program out there in college football. And they have a long-winded question. I think it's tough for the next guy as well. I mean, the Kirby Smart recruiting machine is not slowing down anytime soon. If you're the kind of guy thinking about taking this Florida job, you got to sort of decide, do I want to come tangle in the SEC East with Kirby, when the number 3 class may be the low water mark for him based on what recruiting's going to look like the next couple of years?
Yeah, this is it. This is where SEC is the league where coaches come to die, you could say, because it's kind of become national championship or bust. Ask Mark Richt about that. And to his credit, retrospectively, he handled that situation with grace. Mark Richt did. I mean, he never, got bent out of shape, and I think that's where the Florida president was coming from. When he's saying, McElwain, hey, you knew what you're signing on for. I mean, that's when you start paying somebody $4 million plus a year. That's kind of what you're compensating for. You're compensating for all that. Certainly,